Before we get started, I want to wish you and your garden a very Merry Christmas. This time of year is perfect for slowing down, observing what worked, and learning a few forgotten skills that make next season easier and more abundant. If you appreciate practical, soil-first gardening knowledge like this, take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Now let's talk about one overlooked fermentation ingredient that most gardeners pour down the drain without realizing it could be turning kitchen scraps into living, breathing soil. Why most compost struggles to come alive. Many compost piles break down eventually, but few ever reach their full potential. Scraps rot, smells develop, nutrients leach away, and the end result is often lifeless compost that feeds plants briefly but doesn't build soil long-term. The missing piece is microbial momentum. Decomposition without fermentation is slow, inefficient, and often dominated by organisms that waste energy rather than build fertility. The lost ingredient gardeners used before compost bags existed. That ingredient is fermented grain water, commonly known today as rice rinse water or starch-rich soak water. Long before bottled inoculants existed, farmers reused cloudy grain water to kickstart soil life. When grains like rice, oats, barley or wheat are rinsed or soaked, they release starches and beneficial microbes into the water. That cloudy liquid is not waste, it is microbial fuel. Why fermented grain water works so well. Grain water contains soluble carbohydrates that feed bacteria immediately. When fermented for even 24 to 48 hours, it becomes a living solution filled with lactic acid bacteria, yeasts, and decomposers that excel at breaking down organic matter. These organisms don't just rot scraps. They pre-digest them, making nutrients available faster and locking them into stable soil structures. So, let's talk about how scraps change when fermentation comes first. Vegetable peels, for instance, they soften instead of starting to smell. And fibrous materials, well, they actually collapse rather than just matting together. Plus, nitrogen stays right in the system instead of escaping as ammonia. Instead of attracting pests, properly fermented scraps just disappear quietly into the soil. This is what we call controlled decay, not just some random rot. Now, here's a simple method to capture and ferment this ingredient. Every time you rinse rice or soak grains, just collect the cloudy water, pour it into a loosely covered jar, and leave it at room temperature for, say, 1 to 3 days. You'll notice a slightly sour smell, not foul or putrid. That mild tang means fermentation is active. If mold forms on top, just skim it off. The liquid underneath is still usable. Here's how to apply fermented grain water to kitchen scraps when you're adding scraps to compost or a soil trench. Lightly moisten them with diluted fermented grain water. 1 part fermented water to 5 parts regular water works well. The goal is dampness, not saturation. Within a few days, you'll see that scraps begin breaking down faster than untreated material. Even woody vegetable stems, they soften up quite quickly under microbial pressure. So why does this method create living soil instead of just fertilizer? Well, fermentation encourages fungi and bacteria that actually build soil aggregates. These organisms, they glue soil particles together, which improves structure, drainage, and, moisture retention. Rather than feeding plants directly, what you're really doing is feeding the underground system that, in turn, feeds plants continuously. This is exactly how scraps become soil, rather than just disappearing into thin air. So you see, this approach really helps with winter composting and those cold beds. Microbial fermentation generates a gentle bit of heat, which, keeps those biological processes ticking over even when the temperatures drop. By applying fermented grain water to your winter compost piles or those dormant beds, you're actually helping to maintain microbial populations right through until spring. Then, when the soil finally warms up, life is already established and, well, absolutely ready to support new growth. Now, where gardeners often go wrong when trying fermentation is, well, overdoing it. The most common mistake is using strong, undiluted ferments, which can actually shock your soil biology or, create anaerobic conditions. Another error folks make is sealing containers too tightly. Fermentation actually needs airflow, so you should always allow those gases to escape. And just to add, fermented liquids should smell sour, not rotten. If it smells foul, it's best to just discard it. So, how does this replace expensive soil boosters? Well, many commercial soil inoculants are really just trying to replicate what fermentation naturally provides. By using fermented grain water, you introduce a diverse microbial population repeatedly, and for free, really. Over time, you'll find that soil becomes more resilient, actually needing fewer inputs and, well, producing more consistent growth. So what changes will you notice over time? Soil that's been treated with fermented scraps turns darker, becomes crumbly, and has a lovely earthy smell. You'll also see more earthworm activity, and, water infiltration gets a lot better. Plants start to show steadier growth instead of those sudden spurts. These are honestly signs of living soil, not just nutrient-rich dirt. So, why did this knowledge nearly disappear? Well, modern convenience taught us to discard anything that looks cloudy or sour. Fermentation, became associated with spoilage instead of transformation. Yet, soil ecosystems actually thrive on controlled fermentation. Recovering this habit reconnects gardeners to a slower, more intelligent way of building fertility. A quiet habit that changes everything. Once you stop wasting this ingredient, every rinse becomes an opportunity. Every scrap becomes a building block. Compost becomes predictable, soil becomes alive, and gardens require less effort over time. As we close out the year, remember that the most powerful garden tools are often the ones we stopped using. Share this with someone who composts but feels like something's missing. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep restoring forgotten garden knowledge together. Merry Christmas, and here's to living soil in the year ahead.